Okay, folks, if you don't mind, I'm going to try to get going. We do have a lot of slides to get through, and I want to make sure that you're all okay with the material that I'm going to be presenting to you. So we've been looking at a couple of things in the last few lectures related to whether or not, just because something is published, whether or not something is correct, whether something is accurate, and as biologists and as researchers, whether or not we should take everything that we read about at face value. The papers that you're presenting, for example, if they're brand new and no one's ever confirmed the hypothesis in addition to the researchers that are currently looking at that biological phenomenon, is it actually accurate and is it actually correct? And so one of the things that we are looking at today, which is a little bit different, goes into why people actually believe the types of things that they read. And this gets into what I want you as life science students to actually appreciate, that you're going to be exposed to lots and lots of different things. And you are really, really smart individuals, whether your GPA reflects that or not. And at U of T, it's likely that it doesn't, but regardless, as smart individuals that are coming here to the University of Toronto, you're going to be exposed to a lot of different ideas and a lot of different things. And as smart individuals, you should be thinking as critically as possible about whatever's being presented to you, whether it's in a bio class or an HMB class, in a chemistry class, etc. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about this individual up here. You may or may not recognize him. He passed away in 2011. This is Steve Jobs. Many of you are paying homage to him by using his Apple MacBooks. And some of you may know that Steve Jobs was considered, while he was alive, one of the smartest people around. And Steve Jobs, when he was alive, and he passed away in 2011, one of the things that he was really very interested in were complementary and alternative forms of medicine. Now again, you have to keep all of this in mind. He is living in a technology-rich environment. He is one of the richest people in the world. He's one of the smartest people in the world. And he happens to be really, really lucky in a lot of different ways. And I'll share a little bit about his story before I get on to the actual lecture, because it's really relevant to what I want to talk to you about. Really smart guy, really rich, really lucky. So in 2004, one of the things that he realized is he started to have pain whenever he ate. So after he ate, he'd start to feel pain in his abdomen. He's a rich individual, so he doesn't have to worry, like in the United States, for private healthcare costs. He goes to one of the best research and medical hospitals on the West Coast, Stanford University Medical Center. He gets a battery of tests done, which is not available to the average American. And they diagnose him with a stomach ailment. They send him home. He comes back because his stomach keeps hurting. It's not colon cancer, by the way, which you might be thinking of. And so he comes back to the hospital again because he's Steve Jobs and because he has a lot of clout in this area and because he's at Stanford University Medical Center. He's actually put into a very specialized program that screens for pancreatic cancer. So they look at his pancreas, they take a small biopsy, and we'll talk about a biopsy in a moment. And if you read Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, the pathologist who is doing the examination of the cells that he's looking at under the microscope from Steve Jobs' cancer, because he does have cancer, almost breaks down and cries. Because he realizes that this cancer, which is a neuroendocrine form of cancer, is one, very rare, but two, very operable. Okay, so this is back in 2004. So Steve Jobs hears this advice from the pathologist as a really smart individual who has just heard that you have a rare form of cancer, it's operable, you have the money and the resources to do this. If you take care of it right away, you have a very, very long life ahead of you. And by the way, he's in his early 50s at the time. He decides to ignore their advice. As a smart individual, with all of these resources at his disposal, with the best medically trained minds in the Western Coast, on the West Coast, as well as in America, telling him, you're a really lucky man, he decides to continue to press his luck. And we'll talk a little bit more about him in a few moments. But this is part of the reason why I'm angry. All of you are going to be hit with a lot of different types of advice, a lot of different types of things. You'll read things that actually sound like they're right. But whether or not you choose to actually be like Steve Jobs and to bury your head in the sand and to ignore all the biology behind whatever you're reading and to just take things at face value, that's your choice. It's also that you're going to be affecting the lives of people around you, because as university educated individuals, your voice, your opinion, the things that you say, you may not believe so right now, actually matter. And so I'm going to be angry today because I think that you have a responsibility as biology students to actually make use of your biology training. And a lot of this is sort of almost like fantasy, and it becomes almost like magic in terms of the types of things that we'll be talking about. And this gets into whether or not the way that we practice medicine, allopathic, Western-style medicine, should be the choice that we have, or are there better forms of medicine? Now, I'll leave that up to you. I'm not going to try to influence your opinion or your belief system or your own background knowledge in any way, but I am going to ask you to be biologists for the next 45 minutes. And then at the very end, even in biology, we've already looked at several different controversies related to GDF11, whether it's related to iRisen, people from Harvard publishing in the best peer-reviewed journals that we have, and we still aren't able to come to a consensus. Should you believe any of them? Are we any better, for example, than people who practice things like homeopathy, which you might hear a lot about? So let me tell you a little bit more about Steve Jobs and his diagnosis of cancer. Cancer is, as we've looked at for colorectal cancer, cancer is something that as we get older, it is more and more likely that you are going to develop cancer. And pancreatic cancer is one of those really, really scary forms of cancer. Cancer itself is scary, but pancreatic cancer is twice as scary as the other types of cancer. It is often referred to as a lethal silent killer. And again, you have to keep in mind, Steve Jobs at the age of 50, 52, went in, he got screened. He got this early. He got an operable form of pancreatic cancer. Most people don't even know that they have it until it's too late and you pass away as a result. It is actually not an uncommon cancer either. It is the fourth leading cause of cancer-related deaths in North America. So again, it's a silent killer. He's lucky. He's got all of these resources at his side. He's also got a very benign form, or a relatively benign form. Why is it such a silent killer? Because typically it's asymptomatic. You don't have any symptoms until it's too late, until you're in a lot of pain after you've eaten something. Again, he happens to be really lucky that he had these symptoms early on. So all of these things were in his favor. Now, this is before he started to exhibit weight loss, and we're not really clear if it was weight loss related to the chemotherapy and the other things that he was subject to after he started to get the appropriate levels of treatment. But usually with pancreatic cancer, if you see someone suffering from pancreatic cancer, they have dramatic weight loss, not due to chemotherapy. They're losing weight because they can't process food. Your pancreas, unlike any other organ or any other endocrine, exocrine organ that you have, takes care of most of your digestive processes. You want to digest protein, you need your pancreas. You want to digest lipids or fats, you need your pancreas. You want to digest carbohydrates effectively, you need your pancreas. In other words, for you to eat and to be able to break down chemically food, you need your pancreas. And as a result, when your pancreas starts to go, you have this weight loss. In addition, you typically have pain associated with it, especially when the tumor starts to grow. You might exhibit things like jaundice, which you have a yellow discoloration in your skin, secondary to having pancreatic cancer as it spreads in toward your liver. You might also develop gastric outlet obstruction. This is often associated with Trousseau sign. For those of you who are in physiology, this is not the Trousseau sign that leads to spasming of your hand. That is a different Trousseau sign. Trousseau sign here, meaning that you will develop abnormal clots within your blood vessels. There are two different types of Trousseau sign, and this is related to hypercoagulation. Your blood clots a lot more than it normally does. And this is, again, a really horrific disease, a really horrific disorder to have. As the disease progresses, as you're unable to process food, you will also have steatorrhea. Your bowel movements, your fecal matter is going to become more and more laden with fat because you can't absorb it. And that leads to fat in your fecal matter, or steatorrhea, related to that jaundice. He had none of these at the time. All he had was upper abdominal pain. And again, everything was working out in his favor. He happened to be a little unlucky for whatever reasons, in the sense that usually this is more common in individuals. As you get older, it is more and more likely that you will develop this. It's more and more likely that your grandparents may have a diagnosis one day of having pancreatic cancer. It is not a nice disorder to have. It is a very painful disorder, and I'll get to that in a few moments. If you are a smoker, you increase the odds or the risk that you will develop pancreatic cancer. If you have had a very, very high fat diet or a very high protein content diet for a long, significant portion of your life, I'm not talking about the occasional steak or the occasional fatty meal. I'm talking about eating this every single day for a period of 10 years, you're also putting yourself at increased risk of pancreatic cancer. If you've had previously a Helicobacter pylori infection, and this was shown back in 2011, you are also increasing the risk of developing pancreatic cancer for reasons that we're not completely sure of yet. Many of you may know what Helicobacter pylori is. Where does it normally infect you? It usually affects you in your stomach. If you have an individual who has gastritis or an inflammation in the stomach, or you have an individual who has an ulcer that develops, usually those ulcers, that gastritis, is a result of a Helicobacter pylori infection. But the sad thing is, if Helicobacter pylori actually is a cause or a potential cause for cancer, a third of you sitting in this room right now have no sort of symptoms associated with it, but a third of you are actually sitting here right now infected with Helicobacter pylori. It won't be until later in your life where you might have gastritis or you might have this. You actually have to go in and get screened for this if you have an issue with your stomach. Now, there are other things that are known to cause uh, the pancreatic cancer. If you have autosomal dominant mutations in either the BRCA2 or the associated gene, the partner and localizer of BRCA2, often referred to as PALB, in some instances this is also associated with an elevated risk of developing pancreatic cancer as well, especially since both BRCA2 and PALB are there to help repair DNA breaks. And if you have a mutation in these two different genes, you're not able to repair DNA breaks in the cells that line the pancreas. And of course, the risk factor is not small. It's about 1 in 67, and that's actually the risk of you developing this disorder is actually really, really high. Think about it this way. There are roughly 220 of you enrolled in this class, and approximately 200 of you sitting here right now. That means that the average risk is that over the course, by the time you reach 60 years of age, 2 of your classmates sitting in here right now is probably going to develop, for reasons that we don't know, pancreatic cancer. And pancreatic cancer is not something that you should be taking lightly. It's one of those cancers where we have made almost no progress on. Okay, every other form of cancer, in terms of like uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, all of these things we've made tremendous progress on. But pancreatic cancer, over the last 20 years, we've made almost none, almost zero. And I'll get to that in a moment. 90% of diagnoses of pancreatic cancer are considered to be lethal. Okay, so it's a malignant tumor. You're going to die in 5 years. It's almost a given. And most of these consist of adenocarcinomas. And these arise from the exocrine portion of the pancreas, which I'll get to in a moment. So again, keep in mind that Steve Jobs' tumor was of neuroendocrine origin. It is not part of this adenocarcinoma mixture. It is not the most common type. He had a very rare form of the pancreatic cancer, and he lucked out, and he happened to be in the best possible research medical center in the United States. The remainder, the vast majority, including Steve Jobs, have the 10% or so, have this neuroendocrine islet cell tumor. And they do still form tumors. These are operable tumors. And if you get them taken care of early, it has a very, very good prognosis. And most of these can actually be considered to be fairly benign if you get to them early enough. Now, again, I'm going to go back and give you a little bit more details about the pancreas and the pancreatic cancers. So this is the pancreas. It sits very close or nearby to the duodenum, where it will empty out the exocrine portions into the digestive tract. And of course, the next section would be the jejunum. And again, if you're looking at it, the pancreas actually consists of two different cell types, or three different cell types, if you will. One is an endocrine portion. It produces things like insulin and glucagon, somatostatin, and other endocrine factors which get released, as you see up top here, into your bloodstream. And that's the functional definition of what we consider to be a hormone or an endocrine gland. But the other part, the ones that are really important to help you digest food. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my laser pointer back. If you can give me 1 second. The other portions that sit here in these little clusters actually consist of acinar cells, which secrete things, and they secrete different proteases, they secrete different lipases, they secrete different enzymes that are involved in the breakdown of carbohydrates, fats, as well as proteins, and they get secreted into this duct, which eventually empties into the duodenum, where as you're eating and as the food is mechanically digested here, it gets transferred into the duodenum, and it mixes with all the enzymes that are produced by the exocrine pancreas. And again, there are other things that are secreted by the ductal cells, things like water, bicarbonate, etc., that aid in this process. So your pancreas is actually a really, really small organ, but it's a very, very important organ, both in terms of endocrine functions, insulin, glucagon, diabetes, for example, your ability to regulate your blood glucose levels, and in addition, to help you actually chemically digest the food that you're taking in the first place. Without this, you're not going to be able to eat. And any of you who have had an individual in your family who has had their pancreas removed or has had pancreatic cancer know that their ability to process food is dramatically reduced. As I told you earlier, pancreatic cancer in general, cancer is not a good thing, but pancreatic cancer is like the worst diagnosis that you can possibly get. There are one or two other forms of cancer where it's almost a death sentence, but take a look at the prognosis. And in terms of medicine, as we've looked at before, usually when we talk about cancer, we have a 1-year prognosis and a 5-year prognosis. How many people are alive after you got treated, 1 year after treatment, and 5 years out? And the survival rate after 5 years, so if you had 100 individuals who are diagnosed with pancreatic cancer today, how many of them would be left alive 5 years from now? And this is that 5-year survival rate with the different types of adenocarcinomas, the most malignant forms, only 5. 95 of those individuals would be dead. 5 of them would still be alive 5 years later. This is the best that we can do in 2016. This is, again, part of the horrific things that are associated with cancer, and I haven't even begun to touch on some of the other aspects of this. Now, Steve Jobs was told all of this information. He was told all about the things that he might expect if he had full-blown pancreatic cancer, and the fact that he had an operable form of this pancreatic cancer, and he decided that, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to get the surgery done, even if you tell me that if I get it done, my prognosis is going to be really, really good. He decides that his own body is going to heal him. He decides that, by the way, because that's the culture that he grew up in. In the United States, in the 1960s and in the 1970s, before this organic movement came about, sort of the free will, sort of living like the hippie culture, that was the sort of environment that he had. He liked living sort of in a natural environment. He thought that his own body and having organic juices that would act to perhaps take up any of the toxins from the cancers would be enough to cure him, and that was his belief. And so he decided at the time that no operation for me, I'm going to go home and let my body take care of itself. And keep that in mind. So again, these pancreatic adenomas result from the cells that line the exocrine ducts of the pancreas, and usually these ductal cells are the ones that are the ones that divide the most rapidly anyways. The ductal cells go over a lot, turn over a tremendous amount, and as a result, they're normally there to divide, and these speed up their divisions even more. And it's been thought that mutations that occur in the DNA, because remember there are mutations in some of those DNA repairing enzymes potentially that occur, allow these ductal cells to start going into overdrive. And this is one of the reasons why they might exhibit dysplasia, where the cells that you normally find in the pancreas might be found in other regions of the pancreas, not just within the duct. They will also spread. So not only are they moving out of the places where they normally should be found, that dysplasia, but they will also undergo metastasis where they will move to other organs, which is exactly what happened with Steve Jobs. He left it too long. The tumor decided to grow. The tumor, because there were enough mutations within the benign tumor, it eventually became malignant. And as the malignant tumor spread, it spread to his liver. He had to have a liver transplant fairly late. It spread to other parts of his digestive tract. And we know that these cells, as they're rapidly dividing, start to metastasize, and they can spread to things like the liver, which in his case, again, he was really lucky. He had the money and he had the ability, because he's in Palo Alto, to be able to go to Stanford University Medical Center and get a liver transplant. And he was able to get that fairly easily. It can spread to the lymph nodes, it can spread to other parts of the digestive system, which is why we have to take some dramatic steps if it happens to be found. Again, how do you get diagnosed with this? Again, most of the time you don't. It's too late. You have something going wrong, and by the time you get diagnosed, it's already too late. You might, as Steve Jobs originally had, get some radiologic or CT scans, computerized tomographic X-ray scans. You might have ultrasound done on the pancreas to see if there are any abnormalities. Ultrasound has been shown to be very, very effective. If there are abnormalities in the ductal region, those are detectable by things like ultrasound. He also went one step further. He had an endoscope, which had a flexible tube brought in, and he had a small section of his pancreas removed. And this biopsy, I have to apologize, the extra O should not be there, where parts where you can go in through different routes, and you either get part of the liver as well as part of the pancreas, or just the pancreas. And this is that the hepatic versus the pancreas. We have other tests that aren't very reliable right now for a variety of reasons. We know that there is a cancer antigen 19-9, which is a glycoprotein that is found on many other cell types, not just on ductal cells or within the pancreatic system. And this can often be used if you see an elevation in your CA19-9 levels. It sometimes is diagnostic of some forms of cancer, but it's not universally well accepted that any elevation in CA19-9 is an indicator of pancreatic cancer. Because one of the big issues with this are negative results, where you just have the cancer there, but we can't detect any elevations in CA19-9 for whatever reasons. Some of that might be because some individuals lack the enzyme fucosyl transferase, which actually produces this CA19-9. Even though they have cancer, because they don't have this enzyme, we don't see elevations in CA19-9. So our technology right now is very, very limited. We don't really diagnose well until you go in with the problem. There is no blood screen that we can do because the CA19-9 blood screen isn't that reliable. So what happens when you have pancreatic cancer? What happens when you get that diagnosis that we're sorry, you have pancreatic cancer? Your survival rate is going to be about 5 years, in 5 years, about 5%. What sorts of things are done to try to extend your life? Well, the first thing is you have to get your pancreas radically removed. And if you take a look, this is, some of you might recall this from earlier on in the course in part of your tutorial. And one of the things that was mentioned in one of your readings was what is known as a Whipple procedure. And in a Whipple procedure, a large chunk of your GI tract is actually removed. And all of these structures here in darker pink on the left are actually surgically removed from the individual that has pancreatic cancer. Can you think of a reason why we would want to remove so much of the other nearby organs in addition to the pancreas? So here's the pancreas. There's a tumor growing on the pancreas, detectable at this stage through ultrasound. There's the uncinate process, the sort of hook that connects it to the duodenum that allows the pancreas to stay in place. And all of this is actually removed. Part of your stomach is removed, part of your duodenum, your entire duodenum is removed, part of your jejunum is cut off, your gallbladder is completely taken out, your liver, the hepatic system that supplies the bile to the rest of your body is also rerouted. It's a pretty dramatic surgery. Can you think of a reason why we have to take out so much? Any ideas? Yes. It's probably spread. And one of the things that is done preemptively, because you can actually live without a gallbladder. The gallbladder is there to store excess bile and to concentrate your bile. But you can live without a gallbladder. You can certainly reroute the way that food is being processed. So you would take the stomach, remove parts of the stomach, remove the entire duodenum, salvage whatever you can from the pancreas, because you still need the endocrine part of the pancreas. The insulin, glucagon portions of the pancreas are still left intact. You check to see whether the acinar ductal cells are in any way compromised, and then you remove it, and then you reattach it. And it's a pretty radical type of surgery. It is not an easy surgery, but it can be done. And these Whipple type procedures that you are seeing down here are really important in the management so that it doesn't spread anymore. I also told you that one of the things that happens is that this is not an easy type of cancer. It is an extremely painful type of cancer. If you have pancreatic cancer, you're not going to enjoy your life. That 5 years, you're going to be in a lot of pain. Every single day, you're going to be in a lot of pain. And in addition to this surgery, this Whipple procedure that you're seeing here, in addition to that, which is by itself a very painful surgery to undergo, in addition to that, because you're in so much pain, oftentimes the celiac ganglion, the group of nerves that supply the gut, the celiac ganglion, is often blocked because you need that kind of pain management. You don't want pain signals to be going up into your CNS. And so by blocking the celiac ganglion that supplies this area, you can often relieve or get involved in pain management. And it depends. So you can do this if you're in a lot of pain. But one of the non-surgical options, for example, that is was not used by Steve Jobs until very, very late was chemotherapy. For a variety of reasons. He had the surgery done, and it spread, and he had to have a liver transplant. But the chemotherapy he also left fairly late as well. And he was very adamant in this. One of the things that we know now, and Steve Jobs, by the way, at the end of his life, before he passed away in 2011, he actually had his entire genome sequenced because he wanted to know what was in my DNA that actually caused this pancreatic cancer to spread. Why was it so aggressive? Why did it transform from being a benign form into something that was much more aggressive and malignant? We don't know all of the answers, and his DNA data is still private. It's not commercially or publicly available, but we do know from other individuals that there seem to be some important steps. We know that there are some mutations in BRCA and in PALB that seem to be important because there's DNA damage, and DNA damage, if it doesn't get repaired because there are mutations in those two genes, might lead to this. But we also know that in some forms of pancreatic cancer, because of individuals who get themselves sequenced, that a serine threonine protein kinase D, known as PKD1, seems to be a really important step or a transition in going from a relatively normal, rapidly dividing ductal cell into a much more aggressively dividing ductal cell. And as acinar cells become ductal cells, if they have changes to PKD1, they become much more aggressive in forming more and more of these malignant forms of ductal cells. And we know that this enzyme has been implicated in some forms of pancreatic cancer. And if we can block this somehow, which is the hope, that somehow we might be able to rescue individuals, if we get to them early enough, of developing this transition from having acinar cells becoming aggressive ductal cells to becoming malignant ductal cells. And again, we know some of this from whole genome sequencing analysis. One of the things that we can do now, and in 2011 it was just starting for Steve Jobs, but now whole genome sequencing is something that we can do within half a day. And we know that from individuals, 100 different individuals that had their whole genome sequenced, that there are some landmarks, that there are some things that lead to us understanding that there are indeed genetic drivers. We don't know all of them. There is no blood panel that we can take from you that will let us know that if you have the capacity to develop pancreatic cancer. But we know that there are 4 subtypes based on the types of structural variations in the genes from these whole genome sequences that were developed. There are individuals who will never have any genetic changes that never lead to pancreatic cancer, which are the stable structural variations in the genome. We know that there are local rearrangements to some of the genes that might be involved that might lead to cancer. There are scattered forms where there are scattered genetic variations throughout someone's genome that may lead to or make you more susceptible to different types of pancreatic cancer. And then there's the unstable structural variations that seem to predispose an individual, if they have the same panel of different genes that seem to be unstable, that lead to us being able to suggest or predict that they might develop pancreatic cancer. A lot of this genetic instability or genomic instability, if you were to get yourself whole genome sequenced, and if it came back that you are in this unstable block, a lot of the unstable genome data that would come from an individual who might develop pancreatic cancer seems to have some co-segregation. There is a likelihood that if you are going to get pancreatic cancer, that you are also going to have inactivation of DNA maintenance genes, much like we've looked at earlier. You might have some mutational signatures similar to the BRCA2 as well as the PALB. And this suggests actually that one of the things that we shouldn't be doing is actually inducing chemotherapy in everyone. Because all of this suggests that certain types of drugs, like giving an individual platinum, and platinum is used as a form of chemotherapy, but it doesn't have as many side effects as traditional forms of DNA division blocking type of drugs, as well as others like the PRP inhibitors. All of these seem to be much more targeted at specific forms of cancer. But this is sort of where we're at. Now, we don't have all of the details. And this, for some individuals, leads them to think, well, you know what? You don't have the answers anyway, so why not just go out and try anything? I'm going to die in 5 years' time. You're telling me that I have a 95% likelihood that I'm going to die anyways. So why not let me go out and try whatever I want to anyways? But I want to maybe get you to think about this in a more deeper way, and not just sort of listen to a lecture, but to think about things that we talk about in lectures. So for example, if you were to go to Shoppers Drug Mart, and you were to go to Shoppers Drug Mart and you were to take a look at these different types of pills that were lining the shelves, and you had the cold, would you take cold attack or virus attack? It's being sold to you in Shoppers Drug Mart. It's right beside Tylenol. It's right beside antihistamines. Would you take it? I mean, it says cold attack. You have your midterm tomorrow. You're not feeling so great. You gonna take cold attack? Maybe? Would you at least maybe flip it over and take a look at the label? I'm hoping that many of you will. If someone told you that there was a diet pill, even with someone like Jillian Michaels promoting a diet pill, would you actually take that sort of diet pill? Are things that are natural, would you tend to buy something that's natural or says the word natural versus something that says 100% chemical? Nothing but chemicals in this drug. Would you take that or something that says 100% natural? For example, I have a lot of debates with my own colleagues who are teaching here in HMB about cold effects. They swear that cold effects, if you take it, I'm actually going to get better after a few days. And I said, have you actually read the label in what is in cold effects? There's nothing in cold effects, but you're feeling better. Is there something to all this? And I was actually surprised that many of these individuals, because it's sold in Shoppers Drug Mart and they're teaching you, actually don't even bother reading the labels. They just see it, makes them feel a little bit better, so they'll take it. But I don't want you to be in that same position. Health for us, and we take this for granted, all of you are at the age where you're in your 20s, you're all healthy individuals. The vast majority of you will not have any sort of deleterious effects related to a disorder. You are more likely to get an infectious disease like a cold or a flu or something else, or to break a leg or an arm, none of which I want to happen to you, but I'm just saying as an aside. But at some point in your life, you're going to get sick. You may not want to get sick, but at some point it's going to get sick. And then your view on health is going to be really, really important. Are you going to be taking the point of view that health should have some evidence weighted behind it? That if you're going in and you're going to have a surgical procedure done, show me why I should get that surgical procedure done. If you're telling me that I should be taking a whole bunch of vitamins, I want you to show me why I should be taking a whole bunch of medicines. Is actually the Western view, the evidence-based view, that you have to show me the evidence why you're prescribing this particular treatment for you. Is this indeed the best form of medicine, or are there other forms of health and wellness that we should be taking a look at? Regardless of what you think, I want you to be looking at this through the lens of critical thinkers. You are all here, at least in your second year of studies at U of T. You should be thinking. Someone's going to be asking you, I heard that cold FX is like really, really good for me. And I don't want you to be saying, but my prof in HMB204 said it's really does nothing. I want you to think about it. I want you to research it. I want you to be informing whoever's been asking you of this. But for the most part, I want you to be thinking about things in this sort of way. One of the things that we know that we're really good at least in Western medicine, which is also called allopathic medicine, mainstream medicine, conventional medicine, whatever you want to call it. And by the way, we are changing our views a little bit. However you want to call it, really what we do well, beyond any of the other forms of medicine, what we do better than any other form of medicine, if you're sick and we can diagnose your sickness, we can fix your sickness. But we're more like mechanics. We're like mechanics where if you have inflammation, we're going to give you an anti-inflammatory drug that we've researched, that we have evidence on. If you suffer from hypertension or high blood pressure, we're going to give you a drug that we've researched and have lots of evidence on that gives an anti-hypertensive effect. And the list goes on. We're really good mechanics, but is that really the best way that we should be looking at health as well as wellness? And a lot of this goes back to our core philosophy. In Western medicine, we go back to René Descartes. And René Descartes and many other individuals about 200 years ago looked at the body, and once we understood the anatomy of the body and then the physiology of the different parts of the body, it really became evident that, you know what? Our body is nothing more than a mechanical device. Your heart is nothing more than a pump, and if we can fix a broken pump, we should be able to fix your heart. And this gets into this whole philosophy. Do we look at the human body as a series of mechanical parts that can be replaced? How many of you look at heart transplant, for example, and say that heart transplants don't work? Do they work? So let's take the traditional allopathic, Western, conventional Western type of medicine, because here in Toronto, actually in North America, we are one of the leading centers for different types of organ transplants. Whether you're talking kidney transplant, lung transplant, or heart transplants, in Toronto, we're actually right up there with every other center in North America and in the world. So you should know a little bit about transplantation. So do heart transplants work? They do, and we're really good at heart transplants. So we try to treat a failing heart. If that doesn't work, you're put on a list, and if we can get a match, then you will get a transfer of someone else's heart. And those individuals can live for a very, very long period of time. But keep in mind this, because of this mechanical sort of duality, so your laptop is not your best friend. Your laptop does not have a mind of its own. Your laptop doesn't care if you are slamming into its keys. Your laptop is really there to just take notes, right? Unless you really, really like your laptop. Unless you have a name for your laptop, you sort of separate out the mechanical parts of it from everything else. And that's the way that we look at it. It's your body is just your body. It's just the mechanical parts to how your body works. They're not connected. And that's sort of become one of the biggest attractions in medicine. We now know, by the way, and it is mainstream medicine, it is not sort of complementary, alternative, or integrated medicine. We now know that the body does get affected by the mind, and we know that the mind also does affect the body in terms of your immunity, in terms of how stress works, in a variety of ways. And so that duality actually led to a lot of downfalls in allopathic medicine. And again, this whole scientific process, think about how you actually determine if a drug is really beneficial for you. That whole scientific process was actually worked out by Sir Isaac Newton. We are still following his basic principles to this day on how we do and conduct research, how you form a hypothesis, how you go back and check a hypothesis, how you have to replicate a result in order for us to believe it. All of that goes back to Western medicine, in Western medicine, to people like Isaac Newton as well as Descartes. And this gets into, this is the basic way that we work. This is why we believe things the way that we do. And especially here at U of T, where you're taking a whole bunch of biology courses related to cell signaling or biochemistry, and if you've ever sat there wondering, why am I learning all this stuff? Why does someone care if PI3 kinase activates this downstream effector like AKT or GLUT4 or whatever it is? Why do we actually care? Because we're looking at cells sort of as an ultimate machine. And at that level, we need to take this reductionist approach. If we can fix a cell, we can fix an organ. If we can fix an organ, we can fix your body. And that's really one of the reasons why we are looking at teaching from a very standard reductionist approach. So it is really the body, something that should be approached only as a machine. And I think all of us have this implicit or almost inherent understanding that we're not just a machine. And so there are many, many layers to how my body works best. And so this whole idea is slowly changing over time. But I also think that the whole evidence-based approach, the way that we try to verify whether something works or doesn't work, we can't rely on magic, because magic simply doesn't help everyone. And we need to help as many individuals as we possibly can. And this goal of, or this goal-oriented approach to medicine is one of the other areas that is being addressed. You know, it's not only about curing someone once they're sick, but maybe taking care of them before they actually get sick. And maybe your health doesn't only revolve around your doctor, maybe it also revolves around you. It's just like, I'll try my best to give the best lecture that I can, but some of that studying is up to you as well. And maybe your own health is also up to you. It's not just up to your MD to make you feel good all the time. So again, without going into a lot of details, most of these points are sort of covered already. We know that a lot of these different diseases have a number of different problems associated with it. We want to know, why are you having those issues? What is the physical problem? Is it a mechanical issue with one of your valves? Is it a biochemical issue where you're building up too much urea in your blood? What's going on? We need to have a mechanism. That's the way that we work. As mechanics, we need a mechanism. And this is one of the sort of pitfalls around this whole Western style medicine that has come under attack fairly recently. Maybe we just don't understand what the problem is today. Maybe we'll understand the mechanism in a few years. We don't understand, for example, the genetics for pancreatic cancer, but I think most of us have this implicit understanding that given enough time, we will understand the genetics behind it. And maybe that is something that we should be looking at more on a wider scale. So this gets into this other form of medicine, which has been called complementary medicine or alternative medicine. This gets into why Steve Jobs decided that, based on where he's living in California, which has a lot of alternative therapies attached with it. We have a lot that you're exposed to all the time. But that's really not the way alternative therapy was supposed to work. That's not the original intent of alternative therapy. And one of the sort of central dogmas in all of this is that every individual, all of you, have this ability to heal yourself in the right sort of environment. And that was Steve Jobs' approach. I might have cancer, but you know what? I'll let my own body take care of itself. I'll let my body handle this cancer. I don't need you to be doing surgery on me. Another sort of implicit understanding is that natural healing, if you can get it done through things that you eat rather than getting surgery, instead of getting chemotherapy, having something else done that is more natural, like listening or reducing stress through natural means. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. And I'll get to that in a moment. And that one of the other things that is pervasive in this, in most forms of alternative and complementary medicine, is that this disease is maybe not the traditional Western style approach, this disease or symptoms of a disease are actually how the body is trying to help itself. That you get a fever because it's fighting an infection, that you get a cancer because something else is going wrong in your body. Just let the body heal itself. The cancer will resolve over time. And I think that these are some of the stark differences that we see between allopathic versus sort of the non-conventional or alternative forms of medicine. Nowadays, we call this integrative medicine, and that's the original intent. The original intent was not that you have cancer, let your body heal itself. It was more like integrative, where you get allopathic, traditional Western style medicine, surgery if it's required, and then you can also use these in conjunction with your wellness. So sure, go out, have surgery done, reduce your stress through mind-body mechanisms, eat probiotics, do whatever you want, but also get done the allopathic medicine. And that's why now it's called integrative. We integrate both the allopathic, the Western style medicine, together with these alternative forms. However, for the most part, because they don't agree with each other and because the philosophies are so inherently combative to each other, it's always this is wrong, the other one is right. So if you talk to someone who practices complementary alternative medicine, oh, you know what, your doctors are trying to poison your body. If you talk to an MD, they're going to say the exact same about someone who's practicing integrative medicine. It's supposed to be a multidisciplinary approach. It has not turned out that way. It has turned out that battle lines are being drawn and that you either do one, like Steve Jobs, or you do another. And I'll leave that up to you. I'm not trying to influence you in any way other than to get you to think. I have my own insight into this, and I think that Steve Jobs, for example, should have had the surgery, just like his wife Laureen asked, just like his MDs asked, and everyone around him asked him to do. He decided that his own advice was the best advice. And whether or not we'll ever get to a stage where medicine becomes holistic, we don't know. We hope so. We hope that all of these good elements in alternative medicine come to the forefront. But right now, battle lines are sort of being drawn. And I think that the good thing about integrated medicine is that you have to take your own health into your hands. And that I don't think anyone can argue with. That instead of going out and having that really delicious tasting hot dog and then deciding that you want two more because it was so delicious tasting, as I did over lunch today, that probably I should be taking care of my health a little bit more. And I think that that approach, there's certainly nothing wrong with it. So I'm just going to go through a couple of slides really quickly, and I'm going to have to apologize that I'm not going to get through the entire lecture, but I'll just go through a couple of things that you don't have to know. We know that in this room, even after you've gone through and done whatever major in biochemistry and physiology or an LMP, that a proportion of you, about a third of you, will actually engage at one point in your life, one time or another, in some form of complementary alternative medicine for whatever means. The number of individuals that practice this or use it together in conjunction with regular medicine has been going up steadily, and there is no ceiling on this or plateau that we can take a look at right now. The number of individuals and the total economy devoted to this is actually quite high. These figures are in the US, but similar figures exist here in Canada as well. So if you're looking at the number of individuals or the percentage of individuals, about 3/4 of individuals in the United States have at one point or the other have used alternative forms of medicine, including things that are related to mindfulness. And again, we'll talk very briefly about this as well. And a lot of people use it. So I want you to be aware of why people use it. And I want you to think about this from both aspects, as biologists, but as open-minded biologists, as people who are looking for evidence-based practices, but also being critical of both things that you see in alternative medicine and also in our own discipline in biology. So is Irisen correct? Are the treatments that I'm going to show you for multiple sclerosis, even if it says stem cell, would you believe a treatment that involves stem cells more than you would a type of treatment that doesn't involve stem cells? You're also biased just as much as any of these individuals that you see here on this bar graph. You're equally biased towards science, which is probably a good thing at this point. But I also want you to be open-minded about the biases that blind you to the effects or the biases that are inherent in science as well. So we'll talk about this again in more detail on Friday. And again, apologies on running a bit over time. One last thing before you go, since we're doing Steve Jobs, I also have to do, one last thing. Starting on either Wednesday or Thursday, there will be an announcement for you. And over the next week or so, we're going to ask you to come in, get your midterms, view your midterms, go over them. I'll be in the office in the times that we set up for you over the next couple of weeks. But I want you to go through your exams to see where you have either gone really, really right or where you could improve yourselves a little bit. And I'll be there to try to help you. You'll see that announcement the day before we actually open it up. Please be on the lookout for it.